Namaste. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here again today. I'm heading into Chapter 5, Principle 3 of Aware in a World of Sleep. And just to show you, I have gained a little bit of smarts between last month and this. I'm going to divide Chapter 5 in two because if I did the whole thing, it would be well over an hour. And not only that, the last part of this chapter is quite different from the rest, and I think it needs to be standing separate and apart and to let you view it as something special, I hope, to you. So here we are, Chapter 5, Episode 6, Principle 3. Divine creation is the result of truth activated. And a quote from T.S. Eliot, "Not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything," which of course means our entire attention and awareness. Whether we are conscious of it or not, some kind of creation is always happening. The creative principle of the universe is that the mind of spiritual consciousness is your mind, your consciousness, and my mind, my consciousness. In that way, we are exactly alike, although manifested a bit differently here and there. Divine awareness is infinite, and we are called endlessly to demonstrate it. Such consciousness is not a personal thing that you and I have that is different from one another. What is different is the intellect, for so-called intellect is an ego consciousness dimension and therefore must be judged and calibrated, labeled, if you will. Ego commands it of us. If divine awareness, spiritual consciousness, is the truth of our being, wisdom waiting to be heard, the consciousness of truth, and it is the only real meaning, spiritual truth. In ego consciousness, the truth of which we speak here is non-existent. The only place truth can be found is in our spiritual essence. As my wise father used to say, you don't find a pear under an apple tree. Nor do you find truth in the ego's den of iniquity, our falsely placed belief in a dream, thought to be real and ours. It is good to be grounded in the difference between the two processes. Ego uses projection as its way. It projects error out onto our screen of dreams. When you're living out of ego consciousness, we believe we see in the outer world what we. Let me speak that sentence again. When we're living out of ego consciousness, we believe what we see in the outer world is the truth. When we find ourselves choosing one way or the other as our life path, this is a sure sign we are lodged in ego consciousness. In contrast, when we find ourselves living through intuition and insight, we can be sure this is the only highest good extended on our behalf and that of others. So if we are to demonstrate the inward calling, how do we start? With what does spiritual demonstration begin? Well, we stop, we look, we listen. How? When? Where? By residing inwardly. Go into your closet and pray, said Jesus, meaning metaphysically. Go within to where prayer is found as a secret, a mystery, and close the door to your beliefs and opinions behind you. This subtle difference in rendering is a powerful one, for it tips the metaphysical hand, and that we begin to see that prayer is not something we do or request, but something we find when we listen inwardly. Just what is it we find, you may wonder? We find that we are prayer manifested. How can this be? By listening within in our hearts, from there and there alone, the voice of truth or wisdom's consciousness comes, and we come to know that all is one. The secret we find within us, lodged in wisdom, is that we are divine, and intuition releases this truth to us time and time again. We hear it only when consciously aware. Well, there are layers of illusory approach. Let us take a moment or two to look at how we think humanly in contrast to how spiritual truth emanates. The first level of thinking that is what we might call personal. It comes from the idea that we have a life separate from what we have called God or our inner wisdom. Such a mental configuration says that in our separateness, it is our job to think our way through life, instead of letting wisdom or consciousness, awareness do its business, that is, have its way with us. This is the ultimate duality, the call for outer signs versus the inward way. I feel separate from what I call God, therefore I must do this thing called life by myself. At its base is the false belief that we can do better than God, better than what we call God at any rate. We want better than perfect. Funny, in Scripture we see that God only wanted to create, and he called it all good. We are not satisfied with simply letting creation find its way. We want to change it all, including most everything and everyone around us, to make it the way we want to see it. In this personal way, we try, and think about a kind of physical or material life we want, trying to figure it out for ourselves, mostly to meet our belief in ego needs. This way uses linear, rational intellect, discounting the spiritual value of intuition and insight. In a personal sense, we say to a perplexing issue, I will think about that. No, Jesus said, give it no thought at all. All the thinking you can do will not add one cubit of good to your life, he clarified. Personal thought is self-absorbed, egocentric. I want. This comes from our belief in the small I, which we maintain until we grow to understand the one and only I, the I of which we all are made. This also makes it impersonal. It is a small I we think we are, manifested as smallness in our thought and action, that makes us think that the I is personal. And when someone says or does something that irritates us or pricks our conscience, we take it all the more personally when we're in that I. This is the ego-conscious way of keeping us separate from what we have called God and all others. Giving thought or sticking with thought is what holds emotional pain in its place. It is what holds adult to the description of cement, all mixed up and hardened. Whenever we feel an emotion, that is, have a deep feeling come up, for whatever reason it matters not why, we give the spaciousness necessary to move that feeling through and out of us, only when we do not think about any facet of it. To the contrary, when we keep thinking about the painful emotions that seem to be troubling us, wondering what is their source, why they're here at all, and what meaning their expression must have for us on a physical level, it is those very thoughts that keep us in the dis-ease of the emotion. It is as though the emotion were in fact us, instead of needing only to pass through us. Rehearsal of those thoughts hardens them, gives them power they do not in and of themselves have. Thus the key to freedom is to not become the emotional feeling, but to make it something other than an energetic form that needs to be set free. When we remember to abide in this truth, we are made free, the reasons notwithstanding. When we give power to our emotions, we put into action belief in worry or fret. Actually, worry and fret hold our emotional pain in place, even if we are unaware of the nature of feeling in the first place. There is one reason why we occasionally feel trapped in our emotions. In the physical realm, emotions are trapped by the thoughts that cause them. This holds them in place instead of allowing freedom to be expressed, and thus released. This description epitomizes ego consciousness as a theory and practice of the illusion it is. Belief in ego consciousness is also about working hard until someone we want to care about us thinks we are good enough so we can finally get what we think we deserve, a good view of us. Most of these thoughts come from the beliefs of others, as well as those thoughts and beliefs that have come to us from mass consciousness established over the centuries. The reality is that responses have meaning for us only when we give them power to do so. In and of themselves, views of others have no power of their own, and certainly not over us. Beneath the belief in that false power is the underlying miasma of fear. In this form, fear, we often see ourselves as victims of life's outcomes. As a result, we often cast our circumstance in a negative light, as darkness or ignorance. They did this to me. Life is a bitch waiting to express itself. We are born, we suffer, we die. Life is such a waste. We bury ourselves in similar language that tells us of lost opportunities, which, of course, only tells us that it is we who have cast our place and roles in darkness. I wish I had said no to that. I wish I had thought deeper, done this, accepted that, protected myself. On it goes after the fact. Contrary to this view, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." What did he mean? What other world is there? The kingdom, the spiritual kingdom that is, has nothing to do with ego-based thoughts. It has only to do with letting the truth come to us from within and living obediently only to that. That is the kingdom. It means to let only wisdom reign. After all, when we come to the awareness of wisdom, we see that nothing else really exists, including the false gift of choice. This takes us to the mental realm, where we engage ourselves in seeing something from a different perspective. We may break a leg and see its benefits rather than the inconvenience of the plaster cast that seems to hold us fast. We speak of life in terms of gratitude rather than victimization. I am so glad for my husband. I am so glad I decided to do what I felt called to do. In both of these first two means of thought, we are really working at it. Still, we are trying to make something different out of a paltry form of life, rather than simply letting real life have its way with us. My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not of this world, we hear echoed in our hearts yet again, until we come to grips with its real meaning for us. The following is a story found on the internet which illustrates the difference between personal and mental realms quite nicely. A university professor challenges students with this question: did God create everything that exists? A student replied, "Yes, he did. God created everything." "God created everything?" the professor asked. "Yes, sir," the student replied. The professor answered, "If God created everything, then God created evil, since evil exists. And according to the principle that our works define who we are, then God is evil." The student became quiet before such an answer. The professor was quite pleased with himself and boasted to his students that he had proven once more that the faith in God is a myth. Another student raised his hand and said, "Can I ask you a question, Professor?" "Of course," replied the professor. The student stood up and asked, "Professor, does cold exist?" "What kind of question is this? Of course it exists. Have you never been cold?" The student snickered at the young man's question. But the young man replied, "In fact, sir, cold does not exist. According to the laws of physics which you teach, what we consider cold is really the absence of heat. Every object is susceptible to study when it has or transmits energy. Absolute zero, which is 460 degrees Fahrenheit, is the total absence of heat. All matter becomes inert and incapable of reaction at that temperature. Cold does not exist. We have created this word to describe how we feel if we have no heat." The student continued, "Professor, does darkness exist?" The professor responded, "Of course darkness exists." The student replied, "Once again, you are wrong, sir. Darkness does not exist either. Darkness is in reality the absence of light. We can study light, but not darkness. In fact, we can use Newton's prism to break white light into many colors and study the various wavelengths of each color. But you cannot measure darkness. A simple ray of light can break into a world of darkness and illuminate it. How can you know how dark a certain space is? You measure the amount of light present, isn't that correct? Darkness is a term used by man to describe what happens when there is no light present." Finally, the young man asked the professor, "Sir, does evil exist?" Now uncertain, the professor responded, "Of course, as I've already said, evil exists. We see it every day. It is in the daily example of man's inhumanity to man, and it is in the multitude of crime and violence everywhere in the world. These manifestations are nothing else but evil." To this the student replied, "Sir, evil does not exist either, or at least it does not exist unto itself. Evil is simply the absence of God. It is like darkness and cold, a word that man has created to describe the absence of God. God did not create evil. Evil is not like faith or love that exists just as does light and heat. Evil is a result of what happens when man does not have God's love present in his heart. It's like the cold that comes when there is no heat, or the darkness that comes when there is no light." The professor sat down. The young student's name, according to this written piece, Albert Einstein. The author is unknown. Although there is no way to be assured that this conversation actually took place, the story makes its point clearly and precisely. Here's another story that did take place. Of this I am sure, for I was present to witness it in my own heart and soul. And it is one that makes an excellent bridge between the personal and mental realms, and also leads nicely to the spiritual realm. A few years ago, I was visiting my cousin Tassos in Athens, Greece. After he'd put his then 91-year-old mother to bed, we went over to his apartment for a nightcap. As we sat on his balcony overlooking the city, several stories about his life unfolded, most of them containing a good bit of drama. For him. As he finished, I said something like, "Gee, Tassos, I guess my life is simpler than that, thank goodness." Then I did remember something I thought was worth sharing. "Oh, I forgot," I began. "You remember me mentioning my friend Richard?" He nodded firmly. "Well, he just got his 6th divorce." Tassos took a long, considered sip from his glass of cognac and said, "Isn't that wonderful?" He drew his response out. "What I said? Didn't you hear me? He just had his 6th divorce." "Yes, I heard you," he responded sensitively. "And isn't it wonderful that 6 different women could have loved him enough to marry him?" A new perspective had arrived with its characteristic thump of truth. Wisdom had spoken once again. But this is not the end of the story. The minute I landed back in the States, I called my friend Richard and told him the story. Stunned silence was his only reply, so much so that I thought he had hung up the phone. "Are you there?" I asked. Time was pregnant with pause. "Yes, I'm here," he responded. "I was just witnessing the huge release of guilt and shame I've carried since my first divorce, which only multiplied exponentially over the years. What a gift this is for me," he said with utmost sincerity and gratitude. "I cannot tell you what this has done for me. I'm not even sure I can put it in words. I guess that doesn't really matter. The only thing that does matter is that this awakening has given me a new lease on life, and I am ever grateful to both Tassos and you." Yes, awareness is life-changing, is it not? Indeed, it is that. Now let us follow the transition into the spiritual way of life. The third realm of consciousness after the personal and mental, and the only real dimension, is the spiritual, wherein we gain the truth of any matter simply by going within our hearts, so we can hear that still, small voice that is the truth of wisdom for us. Deeper and deeper we go, exercising our inherent desire to fathom the only real container of life, to find life's real meaning in wisdom, not for anyone else but us. Yet this way is highly impersonal, for it is not for the puny I that truth is spoken. It is for the only truth, the only I, capital I, there is, speaking not just for one or more of us, but as the one in which we have and are the way, the truth, and life. We tend to think that we are to move from one level to the next, although there are some who leap the inferential gap through a gift of grace. In the life of the ego, we think we can gain the truth from some outside authority, some idol outside ourselves. Is there not scripture that speaks to worshiping false idols? Well, this is the false idol of outer appearance. All these false idols we find in the life of the ego, various fragments of beliefs and opinions we have taken to be the truth. Now we know better, and we can manifest on a completely different level by setting the false idols aside, just as Jesus did. If we apply this understanding to the story about my friend Richard above, we could see him going within for the truth of the situation for him. In metaphysical terms, we would want him to see that marriage has to do with his relationship with self, living the truth of his being. He would then be wed to the inward way. It is this to which he must remain faithful. It is about finding himself congruent with the voice of wisdom. As he does, then he is really being faithful to life, individualized, and thus finds himself completed in that rather than through some external validation. All his relationships would then be filled with the authenticity of the loving way, and guilt and shame would have no place to hide. When divorced from his real self, however, quite another way unfolds. What unfolds is the way they can never satisfy, because the approach comes out of the false belief that some other consciousness exists, and it, rather than his own truth, can satisfy him. When living from ego consciousness, my friend Richard is bound to feel separated, and then he wants someone outside of him to make him whole. The pain of separation sends him seeking the comfort of another in order to feel complete and whole. When feeling separated or divorced from the truth of our being, fear and guilt creep in. When lodged in ego consciousness, we naturally feel the need to punish ourselves out of guilt. Is it any wonder then that we could feel ill at ease with everyday life? When ill at ease, we seek company. Misery likes company, it is said, and now we know why this may be so. The good news, however, is that we need not stay in the throes of such misery. All it takes is a sudden awareness that there must be a better way, and then to take the first step onto that path, the better way. It takes courage to see beyond the personal and the mental, but it takes only obedience or surrender to not encourage and not courage anymore, to exercise the truth found in wisdom. Throughout the spiritual, we come to know that we need not ask for, but rather are what we seek elsewhere. We simply declare abundance, peace, joy, and harmony as our reality. These are the real spiritual fruits, and they are ours as inheritors of the kingdom. And it is to these that we really are wed. As a whole, they form an amalgam of truth. By staying faithful to the spiritual way, both the personal and mental simply fall away. We do not have to work through them step by step after all. Indeed, once aware of our truth, we see the illusions we have believed as just that, illusions, and we move on, freed from all that has held the curtain of untruth in place. Many still deal with life mostly on a personal basis. Jesus took many to mental and some to spiritual means, those few who found the real spiritual meaning in what he taught. Such persons grew not only to change perspectives about life, but in discerning the truth they came to meet and live regularly with the Paraclete, the guide Jesus told us existed, and which would serve us in his absence. Actually, that was his teaching all along, whether he was present or not. Always, 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 he told us. He told his followers to go inward for the truth that was theirs. That's the Paraclete. It is only when we live our truth that the peace and joy we are thrives. Surrendering as humility. This going within for one's truth is the ultimate in humility, for it is surrender. Surrender of self with a small s to self with the impersonal divine capital S. Either we can trust divine consciousness for our highest good, or we can trust our own view, our ego view. How good have the personal and mental worked for you lately? Just how vain are we to even think we are separate from truth, so much so that we in all arrogance can do better than divine consciousness or the Christ that is our very essence of being, our very truth that we're to follow. A brief story could well focus your attention on what holds highest value from you. Again, from an unidentified source on the internet, is a story of two wolves, and it goes like this. One evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is angry, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" The older Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." Indeed, what you feed grows. In a similar way, what you pay attention to grows. This is the key message of the book and the video, The Secret. Only that's largely about a material exercise. What we're dealing with here is a spiritual basis, and only that. For spiritually, there is no truth other than this truth. Metaphysically speaking, then, there aren't two wolves to feed, for there is nothing but truth, nothing but divine consciousness, nothing but wisdom, the Christ, the inward healer. Therefore, nothing's opposed to divine consciousness that we might feed. We only believe that there is and that we must. Did Jesus not tell us to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and strength, and you shall inherit the kingdom? Yes, loving your highest self, the truth individualized as wisdom with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, sets free your truth, and all the rest will follow. Notice that no mention is ever made by Jesus, the divine metaphysician, of any material idea. He surely did not tell us to love physicality, or that physicality could provide us with all we really want and need, or that belief is anything akin to ego or mass consciousness would do us any good. To the contrary, his teaching stressed the importance of paying no attention to anything but the spiritual truth, and all the rest, good, meaning the fruits of wisdom, will follow. The spiritual path constitutes the gift of the kingdom, the divine or inspirational ideas and conscious awareness that manifest into the material world when we invest in or worship only the truth. Such commitment reminds me of a recent conversation I had with a wise friend, Tom, during a walk in the early morning hours. We had not visited one another in quite a while, seeing that his permanent home is elsewhere, so we stopped to catch up on the goings-on with one another. During his spiritual conversation, he said that he had been supporting me from afar with writing that was coming through me. He asked what my process was, and after hearing my description, he said this: "That reminds me of what Mark Twain said." I think it was he. He said, if I may paraphrase, writing for him was like pulling a rope out from space with notes attached to it, not knowing what was going to come next. In just that one simple sentence, he had described precisely what my process was and what my feelings about it were. Then he added the ultimate metaphysical question, which pleased me to no end. The real question, he said, is what is it that continually feeds or provides the rope and notes? Knowing Thomas I do, especially seeing the glint in his eye as he announced this question, I knew that the truth of the matter was already clear to him, just as it was to me. Grace expressed in a single moment became the truth for all time. In that single moment, we were affirmed as one yet again. Pardon me, I need to take a little sip of water here. The deeper truth found in the story is for us to acknowledge and activate that which lies in waiting for our awareness to embrace. Divine essence is present in the infinite array of gifts contained in the truth that resides in us all. Once we become aware of the specific gift in its divine form, it is activated in our being and then held in a loving spaciousness. Surrender commands of us. It grows into the divine effect that is contained in its very fiber. When the divine truth and its activation being inseparable, what else could manifest but the loving way? When we fail to listen to the still small voice, we instead put into force some form of ego consciousness that can only serve ego. Ego has not as its purpose, nor is it in ego's domain to serve spiritual ends. Instead, when we move out on our daily practice from the realm of ego consciousness, we are using the immense energy available to us for egocentric purpose. Is that bad? No, it's only what it is. It don't need a label, and it needs not to be judged, only discerned. Actually, it is not what it appears to be at all. It's only illusion, thought to be the truth. The key is to discern truth. Is truth governed by spiritual consciousness or a belief in ego consciousness? Once discerned, you will know without fail that spiritual consciousness is what you really want. If you go to outside authority to see life through the lenses of the egocentric material world, this is what will show up for you. But don't be surprised by that anymore. Remember, we cannot have it both ways. We cannot serve wisdom and mammon, the material demands of ego consciousness. Just remember that the latter really does not exist in the spiritual world. Should you choose the latter, ego consciousness, and later come to regret it, fear not. All it takes to reverse the pattern is an awakening to the awareness of the truth, and practice the exercise of this awareness until it returns you to the perfection of being you already are and have simply forgotten. It is said that what we choose, remember, we don't choose, we forget. Remember that life is not about choice, it's about knowing the truth and surrendering to it and forgetting the rest. While in ego consciousness, we think we choose wisely. Just know that ego will fight you for this the entire way out of its fear of being replaced. You can avoid the fight by exercising the awareness that there is only one way, thus eradicating choice as an option altogether, and duality along with it. The idea of rendering what is given us to render is reinforced in a piece by William Rathon, found in Volume 1 of his Association Address, 1912 to 1938. He adds this fuel to the fire of enthusiasm for the truth heard. Listen carefully. Fresh opportunities are constantly arising. We must remember that all opportunities always provided. We all often have to hunt for it. So don't wait for it, but go after it. It can be made out of ordinary circumstances or conditions, but when it is insight, promptness is needed. Do not wait for it to come around again, for it may forget where you live. It is a case of striking while the iron is hot. If the iron is not hot, you can make it so by striking the same place until it gets hot. If opportunity sometimes hides, perseverance finds it. If it flees, chase it, and despise not the day of small things, for little opportunities will grow into big actualities. Well, amen, I say to that, and a women as well. Forgetfulness. Some forget their foundation of wisdom and behave irresponsibly, erratically. No matter what, we give love and respect automatically to the spiritual being because it is divine essence and thus good. This is how we can come to love Hitler and Saddam Hussein and even the rapist. Out of this knowing, we thus comprehend that as soon as we call one evil, all must also be evil. Just so, each is good, and once we render someone good, all must be that. It is interesting to watch whom we exclude and why from either list. This does not mean that we should not hold people responsible for their offenses. Those acts that form out of ego consciousness, what we see and call as evil, form because of belief in a life separate from our innate essence. Pardon me. Despite the abiding love we give unabashedly to the essence of the offender, however, the one who has expressed this offense out of his ego-conscious nature must earn respect from and receive justice in the world of his choosing. As a case in point, Recently I was talking with a friend who described to me the gist of a conversation she had with her husband in the confines of their counselor. The husband was demanding respect from his family because he was the father and thus deserved it, doggone it, simply because he was the father. Where he got that idea, no one can say, I suspect. Nevertheless, the counselor responded, I can see you believe that. Let me tell you that I have many couples that come in here with one or the other parent is abusing the children. Should those children be expected to respect those parents just because of their biological role, even though they are being abused? This made it plain enough. Each of us must hold ourselves accountable for what we demonstrate, no matter how we label it, and despite the real truth of our being. As long as we choose ego consciousness as a realm from which to render meaning, that is the price we must pay. If we are to dance in this realm, we must indeed pay the fiddler, no matter who he is. At the seat of ego consciousness, we paint with the illusions of untruth, and these images fill the canvas our life becomes. On the other hand, when we reside in wisdom and real treasures activated into being, all the rest comes into that same awareness, and our canvas resonates with soul. If our creation begins with the view of life as divine essence it will be. If not, well, we can get many material things worked out and material benefits derived, but those do not really last. And do they serve any real purpose, really? Do any of these give us real peace of mind, fill our heart with joy, or help gain enthusiasm for our journey? What is it we wish to exercise throughout eternity? Material collection or fruits of our wisdom? Prosperity, the essence of our being, is a function of spiritual demonstration, not material accumulation. Spiritual prosperity is about peace of mind, a joyful heart, an attitude of gratitude, and the abundance of divine ideas with which to guide our lives. At the heart of our description of prosperity must be the gift of wisdom that sets it free. So all we need do is invest our conviction to this definition of abundance, and we shall inherit the kingdom. Indeed, we then are being what we want to see. Let's see here. This is where I stop. Okay, one more section. So, only the best. So many ask, how do I know what is best for me? The truth of what I am for me. We've already spoken about the still small voice that speaks from the silence of our being. The simplest answer then is this. Just listen in your heart of hearts for the truth. What does that look like? Well, here's one example. Some time ago, I was visiting one of my family on the West Coast. While there, I had lunch with a longtime friend. He was recovering from a recent divorce and needed a friendly ear. Having just sold his house and feeling quite alone, he began telling me that he had no idea what to do with the rest of his life. First, we ran through all his current options for which he had no enthusiasm at all. None. As he listed them one by one, his tone was flat, his interest mighty low, and he dismissed them out of hand. Was there any of them he could not do? Of course not. He could do all of them, and well. But he wisely did not want to do something just for the sake of doing something. Eventually he got to the end of his list. All of a sudden he became alive. He had always wanted to travel and excitedly began to list places he wanted to go and people he wanted to visit for years. To say he lit up like a Christmas tree at the Rockefeller Center is no exaggeration. Are you listening to yourself, I asked. Whatever do you mean, he responded. Well, I began. With all the other things you've offered up as possibilities, you were flat, disinterested, no enthusiasm whatsoever. Now with this expression of what you really would like to do, you're alive with energy. You are smiling, really enjoying the idea. So, he said, so what? So what? Here's what I responded. Enthusiasm, passion for life, is what it means to be with your highest self, with your inner truth. It is the clearest signal that is the truth for you. Really, he rejoined? But I have a responsibility. I can't go anywhere. A responsibility to what and to whom, I asked curiously. To the money I made on the sale of my house. Whoa, a responsibility to your money? I challenged him. What about the responsibility to fulfill your soul's calling, longing? When will you honor that? Oh gosh, he exclaimed, you just gave me permission to do this. No, I responded in earnest. You just gave yourself permission to consider the truth for you. We then worked over his finances, and in no time at all, we tallied the rent for the apartment he was about to move into, the anticipated cost of utilities, the benefit of no car payment or gasoline costs, no cable TV, and all the money he was spent on food, moving, and the like. He even volunteered he'd have no trouble selling his furniture instead of storing it while he traveled. He was ecstatic. I had never before seen him like this and told him so. When we parted, he was going to complete his plans to feed his enthusiasm. Well, a few days later, he emailed me to say that things were moving right along and I would be surprised at how far he had gotten in his planning. Then, in another day or two, he called to say he just couldn't do it. He had done due diligence, and all this was more complicated than he had originally thought. Oh no, I remember thinking, the ego has gotten a hold of him. Besides, he said, I just don't want to do this alone. What became of nourishing your soul and enthusiasm you had for the truth you heard, I asked. Well, he responded, that will just have to wait. I could have cried for him, but it is his life and I have no right to live it for him. Only he can do that. As my wise father used to say, if I put my head on your shoulders, you wouldn't be you. This is a good adage to apply in such situations. I tell you this story for two reasons. The first is that the voice of enthusiasm and passion for expressing the truth are of primary importance. These are what make us alive and what ignites the soul, and what should be followed if we are to honor our spiritual being. Just be sure you do not confuse the more superficial level of excitement, much like infatuation, with genuine enthusiasm and passion, and you will always be in touch with what is really best for you. Secondly, I tell you this because of the obvious culprit that kept my friend from exercising his inalienable right, the abject fear of being alone, for it keeps us in relationships and jobs that no longer serve us and places us in situation after situation that are absolutely wrong for us. If only he could have seen that following one's enthusiasm eliminates such fear. All it takes is the first step, and fear is sent on its way. As I heard from the still small voice during a special prayer method years ago, you want all the answers before you begin. All you have to do really is start, and I will reveal what you need to know the rest of the way as you go along. The first step is all you need to take right now. This is another way of saying love God or your truth or wisdom with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and all the rest will be given unto you. Thus, divine presence and commitment is what keeps us from being alone, and what guides us as we enthusiastically express wisdom in each present moment. All we need to do is to take that glorious first step rather than staying mired in fear, which holds us in place of the old. Another sad thing about my friend's decision is that by not nourishing his soul, he had placed himself exactly where he did not want to be, under the rule of his ego consciousness yet again, all alone in his new apartment, stewing over having not made another choice. He was not a happy camper. If only he could have seen that none of us is ever really alone. How could we be alone when we are all really one? It is our current state of consciousness that holds us in a particular frame of mind after all. Unfortunately, when we adhere to the ego's way, we end up feeling alone, separate, and governed by fear. That is the ego's lair. It is the trap or web that imprisons us, the government that habitually does us in. When we acknowledge the conscious awareness of the voice of wisdom, then all these limitations disappear from view, and we receive, yes, you guessed it, all the gifts of the kingdom. One of the beliefs haunting us in such deliberations is a false parallel drawn between being alone and being lonely. If I have become aware of the happiness, peace, and joy I really am, just where is there room for loneliness? No matter what, when I'm in touch with my spiritual reality, it matters not whether I am alone or in the company of others. I am still what I am, and no one can change that, one way or another. And at no time have I heard what I am called alone. Many think it is life that builds character. Spiritually speaking, life's challenges do not build character at all. They reveal it. Either you have what it takes or you don't, and actually you do. We all have it as we become aware of its depth and breadth. And when we act from it or the lack of it, either way it works. What it takes is going within to hear the true character of being and then allowing that to flourish without fail. This is real character, which comes out of the power of awareness. Character is not something we build because some external force raises the bar of expectation. Real character comes out of genuine humility. Indeed, real character is about being humble enough to get out of our own way and favors listening in order to hear the truth rendered in our voice of innate wisdom. Being actually is our truth, is what gives us power of spirit. This is humility defined. Without humility, we are only following our belief in the ego's beckoning. From and within each character cannot be found. Really, we all have character. We just need to become aware of our real character and then simply demonstrate it under all circumstances and conditions. Okay, I need to continue a little bit. Creation, the bottom line. Creation is the funny thing. As I posited in another book, What If? Creation comes to speak in a variety of ways. Sometimes it speaks out of ego consciousness, while the others from the divinity we are. Here's that quote. We create constantly, yet fail to acknowledge creation as our natural way of life. Whether one connects with the idea of a divine creator or not, surely one can come to the understanding that most everything we do and say is an act of creation. We create words and phrases and sentences galore. We create looks of all kinds, gestures without end. We create art and stories and friendships, even enemies. We create war and not much peace, animosity and not much forgiveness. We create sumptuous meals, renewals through spring cleaning, renovation of homes old and not so old. We create inspiration, oftentimes unwittingly, yet always profoundly. We create welcome and warmth of being, receptivity and spiritual awareness. We create more room for enlightenment and insight. We create and create and create. This is our most natural expression, creation. Yet we rarely attribute what we call our creations to the example set by creation of what we are. Each creation stems from an idea, even if only briefly acknowledged or known. And each, when embraced by conviction or faith, comes to fruition, though not always precisely as envisioned. The point is that each does come to fruition, bears the fruit of the one from whom the seed comes. When we get out of our own way and let the idea flow from the seed of our divinity, that too bears fruit, but of a different kind. Yet both kinds of fruit, that of egoism and of divinity, are in the perfect image and likeness of intention, or the founding idea. Our function is what we call creation, to remember only that we are divine beings from our essence, our most natural function. Our divine purpose is to produce divine fruit. In either case, the fruit is perfect, that is, perfectly formed from its founder, and thus not to be judged, but rather discerned. When we see the fruit, can easily discern from which seed it comes and can adjust creation to fit the truth of what we are. Creation individualized and individuated, and yet in creation we are at and as one. Strangely, we also seem to create out of ideas that are not divine, those that stem from our belief in ego consciousness, as well as those that have been taken as true from collective or mass consciousness. We demonstrate misery, failure, tension, wars, difference, and deceit. Even some seemingly good creations come to the fore out of ego consciousness. Similarly, each of these has its forebears in the holy place of ego consciousness. Truth is only those creations that stem from inner truth reflect truth. While others may seem to do so, they are merely reflections of ego misunderstood. Just because we do what might please someone does not mean it is a reflection of the highest good to be demonstrated in the moment. Do not let the appearances of good lull you to sleep, and living from wisdom brings enthusiasm for life to the fore. The central point to remember is that when we see the effects of our belief in ego consciousness, and they are clearly represented in our daily existence, let this be a clue and cue to return to divine consciousness as the only real cause of creation. As in all of spiritual life, to begin in and as truth not only establishes truth as the only real being, it also guarantees a life of nothing but truth expressed in our individualization of the way. It is for this that we are here. This is our purpose and description of being at one. This is the way, the truth, and life of which Jesus spoke and taught. Daring to differ. I'd like to risk a shift in perspective at this point and say that life is about demonstrating inspiration heard inwardly and not about creating at all. Just contradicted myself. That's perfectly okay. Listen further. There's a big difference between the idea of creating and the spiritual demonstration. Life is not about magic, something we have labeled creation, turning nothing into something. Life is about validating the evidence of truth, our innate consciousness, inspiration made aware, bringing the face of that evidence out into the open as we witness its source. What we thus are demonstrating is that we are being at one with truth. Our purpose deals with the act of being fulfilled by demonstrating the voice of inspirational vibration, the resonance with truth heard inwardly. From a metaphysical point of view, the single criterion for validating spiritual demonstration is to discern if what we are demonstrating is coming from the one real source, period. We either began our demonstration at the source or we did not. Either we demonstrated a spiritual source or we are demonstrating no thing at all. This may seem too far for us to stretch just yet, but if I ask you to consider the suggested shift and see where it takes you, just try it. Just revisit the previous paragraphs dealing with creation and substitute the term demonstration for creation and see if any meaningful shift occurs to you. That said, until and unless you can see some real difference between creation and demonstration, by all means stick with creation. Okay, one last section. As you prepared for a treatment of spiritual belief, are you prepared for? No, I'm going to start the next section with this paragraph, and I'm going to leave that here for now. We will go to the next episode, episode 7, on the same principle, principle 3. The next time we get together, it's one of those things we just have to take piece by piece. and consider it carefully. You know, I like to finish up these sessions with a little post that I've seen somewhere between last week and this week. Here's one for you. I think a very, very, very important one for all of us to consider. The next time you realize you're being too hard on yourself, think about all of the beautiful, imperfect people that you love. You accept them as they are. You're even thankful for them. You love them, flaws and all. You deserve that kind of love. Start by giving it to yourself. So, between now and next week, please start by giving that kind of love to yourself. Practice it fervently. Every time you feel out of joint, it means you're not giving yourself that kind of love. Let that be a guide for you as you go from this week to next. And so, until we meet again, dear friends, namaste. I love you.